Okay, so good evening, everyone, and welcome to your automated testing part 2 class. Okay, so in today's class, we'll be discussing widget testing, which is a little bit more advanced and a little bit more tricky than unit testing, right? So in our previous classes, we talked about unit testing and talked about mocking. I explained unit testing, what you use unit testing to do, you use to test the core logic, the core functionality of your application. That's unit testing, right? And you have things like mocking and installing, which I explained with the unit testing, right? So that's for your core functionality. But sometimes you might need to not just test the core functionality. You might want to test how the functionality interacts with the UI. Okay, how the UI interacts with the functionality or vice versa, right? Maybe you have something that maybe when you press a button, it changes something on your UI, or your UI reflects a change because something in your application state has changed. So you want to be able to test these things. Unit testing is not just enough now in this case, right? In this case, this is where widget testing comes into play, right? Okay, so this class is going to be more of a very practical one. We've seen a lot of code examples, and I'm going to urge everyone, please follow me directly. If you have any question, do not hesitate to raise up your hand at that instant. Yeah, I want to carry everyone along in this class. All right. So yeah, widget testing used for testing your widgets. Okay. That's an oversimplification, right? But the best way to understand it is it's used to test the interaction between your UI and application state. So once you have that, that's the core concept of widget testing. Okay. So right now I'll be going over to my VS Code so we can get started. I'm sure we all remember the basic concept of testing from our previous class because if you don't, you might find it hard, challenging to grasp this one, but I believe we do, right? Because we've what I've heard from your tasks. So yeah. So give me a thumbs up, right? If you can see my VS Code right about now.
Yes, we can see your
Okay,
screen.
okay. Okay, beautiful. Okay. So let's get all this out of the way first. So widget testing. First of all, I'm going to show you the basic structure of widget testing, the things you'll be needing, and the APIs, important APIs to look at. So let's set up this file, basic file. You import your test package. And this is all preliminary stuff. I had to clear the file so we can start afresh and you can follow me. So remember in our unit testing, the package we imported in this test file was called package test.dart, right? But for widget testing, we are importing Flutter test.dart. Now, the idea is that Flutter test.dart depends on test.dart internally. So, but you don't get to see that. You just use the Flutter test.dart for widget testing. Okay. Yeah, because your hand is up.
Yes, sir. I just remember something I also struggled with. So I was trying to run that test, like run the command that test to test, to check my test. But it was throwing error and saying that I can't find. It was mentioning some particular widget, of course, which is not found in that. So that I had to use
Okay.
something like Flutter test. So I don't know if you could help us explain the idea behind that, or what is it about the that test and Flutter test, the difference between the both and when to use them.
Okay. I'm going to explain that now, right? So the thing is, with Dart test, Dart is a programming language of its own aside Flutter. Dart can exist outside of Flutter, right? Some people use Dart to write backend systems. So if you want to test your Dart program without Flutter, that's where the Dart test comes in, right? But if you're using any component of Flutter, right, you are always advised to use Flutter test. For instance, in your use case, you were testing an application, a UI application, right? So you had to use Flutter test because what you're testing is associated with Flutter. So Flutter kind of provides a wrap around that test to provide most of the things you need, right? Does that answer your question, Ngozi?
Okay, yes, it does.
Okay, I see some people joined us, David and Good News, and Ginika. Yeah, Ginika has been with us since. So we are talking about widget testing today, and I
Sorry,
haven't.
I was logged out, please. Sorry.
Yeah,
I
that's
just
fine.
had
That's fine.
Ginika.
So I haven't really started the examples, right? But I just see some people joined us. So let me just quickly go over what I said before we start looking at examples. So widget testing. Last class we talked about unit testing. Today we're talking about widget testing. I explained that widget testing, when do you need it and what is it for? Basically, widget testing is a way for you to test the interaction between your UI and your application state or core logic or business logic, however you want to name it. Okay. With unit testing, you're only testing the program itself without the UI. Okay. You're just testing the program itself without the UI. Okay, but with widget testing, you test both. You can test both. Most times you test both in widget testing, right? So we'll be looking at the core structure of widget testing, the APIs you would be needing, and just to get you started. I'll be looking at examples, of course. So this is the idea behind widget testing. First of all, you import your Flutter test package. Flutter test is for widget testing. The normal test is just for unit testing, right? I explained that earlier. So how do you write your first tests? Remember in the previous class, we used tests. I explained that you use tests to write the test and everything. But with widget testing, you take it up a notch. Instead of using the test function, you use the test widgets function. You can see it has almost the same signature as the normal test one. Let me just put the test one side by side just to compare what we have. Okay. Okay, beautiful. You can see this is the normal test function for widget testing, and this is the one, sorry, this is the normal test function for um unit test, and this is the one for a widget test, right? So okay. So how are they different? They are different in that if you look at the signature of this, you can see this just takes a description, and the body of the test, which is actually your test case, is a function without parameters, is a synchronous function without parameters. It could be asynchronous, right? It could be, but you just call it a closure, a callback, a function. It doesn't matter, right? But with a widget testing function, that's a test widget function, the function has to be asynchronous. So you can see my IDE. My IDE kind of screams at me if I try to do this. Say blah blah blah, the body might complete. This is just because it wants me to add async here. So once I do that, everywhere is all good now. Now, another key difference is that this test widget function, this one here you see here, it takes a parameter. but this one doesn't take a parameter. And now this is very, 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 very important. Okay. First one doesn't take a parameter, but this one for widget testing takes a parameter. And let's look at what that parameter is. Now, if I hover over the documentation real quick, I see it is of type widget tester. Now, this widget tester is what will give you access to the UI. Okay. With this widget tester, you can be able to interact with the UI, with your widget. You can do things like scrolling, do things like tapping, you can do things like rebuilding a frame, redrawing, all those things. You can use this to, we're going to see examples of code, right? Okay, so this is the basic structure of a widget test case. Okay, so this is a widget test case. Right now, they're noting our test, right? Okay, so to write our first test, to showcase the APIs of this tester object, let's set up a simple widget, right? We just call this example widget. It's a snippet. Five is not supposed to be hard. Okay. So in this widget, we have just simple text that says hello world. I'm sure in every one of us, our first programming tutorial we ever had, they told us to print hello world. Yeah, so we're going to use the hello world example here too now. So first of all, let's comment this out. You don't need this for you, we just need the example widget. So first of all, when you have your widget and you want to test it, right? The first thing you must do is to, well, in Flutter terms, it's called pump. Pump is like normally in your okay, let me show you an example. In a real application, in your main function, you have the run app, right? For instance, in this app, you have the run app function. What this function does is it takes this object that we're creating here, inflates it, and puts it at the root of our widget tree. I'm sure we know that Flutter uses widget tree to organize UI components, right? So this is the entry point. This is basically the entry point where your UI starts being drawn on the device, right? So you have to replicate something similar for our test to be able to see our widget. So how do we do that? Because you can't use the run app function now, we have to use something else. And what is that something else? That something else is something called the pump method. Okay. Rather, a variant of the pump method which is called pump widgets. Okay. Remember we created our widget, our simple widget, the example widget. Now we want to kind of set it up. Okay. Now we use the pump widget function. So if you look at the documentation real quick, we see that it says something like renders the UI from the given widget, blah blah blah, calls run app with the given widget. You just get the idea of what it does, right? So this is the first thing you should do. And now you give it the parameter, sorry, an argument of your widgets, the one you want to test. Okay. Now this is asynchronous, right? Hence why this function had to be asynchronous. So because it's asynchronous, you have to await it. Await it. Okay. Okay. Now we've set up the widget. Now we want to test. Let's say same because we just have one text widget. We want to be like, okay, let's assert or let's make sure that a text widget exists inside our widget tree. This will be our very first test. Okay, we want to check that this text widget actually exists inside the widget tree. So how do we do that? We use finders and matchers, another important API, finders and matchers. How do you do that? To use the finder, widget finder, you use the find objects. Okay, you can see I use the dot you can see when I do the dots, it has several methods: find dot by subtype, find dot by key, find dot by icon, find dot by type, find which all anything you need, right? Find dot by text. Okay, so we want to just find by type. By type. The type of the widget we're looking for is text. So how do we do that? We do a find dot by type texts widgets. Okay, beautiful. Now this will give us results, and this result is what we'll be matching with. Okay. So this is the idea. You have find dot by type a text widget, that result. Now you want to expect. Now the next thing to do is to check your result. Honestly, the Darts APIs pretty much read themselves out. So if I'm ready to read this test case now, what we have here is tester pop widget, find by type, expect result finds one. So even if this is not grammatically correct, but when someone reads it out to you, you basically get the idea, right? So we are pumping the widget, making it the widget root. We are basically instantiating our widget key here. And we want to check that the text widget exists here. And we do a find by type, and we expect that it finds at least one. Now, if you hover over the documentation of this finds one object, you can see that it's of type matcher. During the unit test, I explained matchers. Okay, I explained matchers. We saw things like is equals matcher, is not null matcher, everything. So matchers are very important API in testing for that. Okay. So let's try and run this test, right? We need to run because we're using parts of Flutter, we need to use a Flutter test. Now, if I run this test, right, the test should okay. So now if I run this test, right, the test should fail, and I'll explain why it fails, I think. Because we might run into this issue too. So let's quickly run that test. Okay. Okay, beautiful. So the test fails, not because our test case is wrong. Our test case is programmatically correct. We have a text widget here, and we just simply want to check that the text widget is actually inside the widget tree. The test case is correct, but why is the test failing? Because of some flutterish issue. Okay, it's basically saying that we need something directionality, blah, blah, blah. So how to fix that is just come here. So how to emphasize this so that in case you're writing your test and you run into this issue, just know what's causing it. Okay. Thing is not what it. Okay. Basically, material app has some directionality inside it. So you need to wrap your widget inside the directionality widget. So for these things to work. So that's by the way. So if you run this test now, it should pass. Okay. Okay, beautiful. So you can see the test passes now. Now, let's say we want to expect that we find a button, okay? And we are obviously, and in our widget, you know that we don't have any button inside this widget, right? We just want to say find dot by type, of course, which is my favorite, find that by type because it just gives you what you want, right? So let's say we obviously do not have a field button inside our widget tree, and we know that. It's too much cheese. Okay, and we want to, okay, of course. Now there's a concept of, I think I've explained it earlier, there's a context of a correct test case and an incorrect test case. When you write an incorrect test case that passes, it is still wrong. Okay. Now the bug is not in your program, the bug now is in your test. So now the correct test case for this now will be, since you're finding a field button and we know that this field button is not anywhere inside our widget tree, rather than use a find one, which would be an incorrect test case, we want to do a find nothing. So this is another important matcher. Okay. Maybe you might have, let me give you an example use case, right? So maybe in your UI, you might have something that maybe when the state changes, you're using a ternary operator or an if condition to not display a widget. So you want to test that widget is not displayed when your state changes. So this is where you use find nothing. So if you run these tests, it should work. It should pass again. Okay, as you can see, it says all tests passes because obviously we know what we are testing for, and we're just basically checking. So that's the finder. There are other methods, there are other ways you can find widgets in your this thing, right? You can find by the actual text, by the actual string, right? Let's say a widget contains a string inside your widget tree. You can find by the actual string. How do you do that? You just do a find dot text, I suppose. I think, yeah, text. So you the text passing the actual text and in the correct casing. So here we have, I think what we have is hello world. We want to find one. Okay. Now this test again, if we run it, should pass. Okay, beautiful. Now, if the idea is for this text one, if you pass an incorrect case, even if it's the same thing grammatically, the test has a bug and would fail. So that's the idea. You have to pass it in the correct casing. So if you run this test, you can see that, okay, beautiful. You can see that it fails, right? Okay, let's look at the log. Okay, it says the following test failure was thrown running the test. Expected exactly one matching candidate, but because we are expecting that it finds one, but none was found. That's basically what we're trying to say here. Okay, and this is stack trees. That's not our concern right now. Okay, so that's about finders, right? So let's move on to more advanced things. How would you typically use this?
Sir,
Yes.
please, can you help explain the last concept, this find or text, why it fails again? I didn't catch that.
Okay. That's fine. So we are trying to find a widget by the actual text. We are trying to find the widget that contains this text, and I explained that you have to pass the text, the string, in the correct casing. Gimmick, I'm coming to your question. You have to pass the string in the correct casing. Here in our widget tree, which we are testing, we have the hello world capitalized. The W is capitalized, but here we gave it a small letter. That is why the test failed. Initially, when I gave the capital letter, the test passed. Okay, did that answer your question?
Yes, it did.
Okay, thank you. Ginika, please go ahead.
All right, sir. What if we have multiple text widgets or multiple type of widgets inside our widget tree? Does that now say we should use the option of find.text instead? I don't know if you
No,
understand.
okay. Yeah. Okay, so I was coming to that, but I think you've beat me to it.
Oh,
So
sorry.
let's look at an example, right? Let's say we have multiple text widgets now, widget tree now. So this is an example of multiple text widgets, right? Here we have hello UK. Okay. Now the idea is you can do a find dot by type text, but the thing is that it's not going to find one. It's not going to find one. It's going to find multiple. So how do you actually check that it finds multiple widgets? So you use the matcher. Again, matcher is very important. So how do you use the matcher to make sure that it finds at least 3 widgets? So let's scroll to these matchers now. You can see the first one is finds any, finds nothing, finds one, finds widget, finds widgets, finds exactly. Okay, beautiful. So now the thing is, here we can use finds exactly 3 or finds at least 3. Okay. So if you run this test, let me uncomment this one now. If you run this test, it should pass because now there are exactly 3 text widgets in our widget 3. Okay. So if you have multiple widgets in your widget 3 and you want to check that they exist at that exact number, you use this matcher, finds exactly, finds at least. I'm sure we know what at least means. At least means it can be more, but it's not below the number. So that's the idea. So as an example of at least, you can use because there are 3, you can use at least 2. Okay, now this test again. Now this test again should work. So this is how you check for multiple widgets in the widget tree. Does that answer your question, Ginika?
Yes, sir. But in this case where we have up to 3 texts, is there no way that you can find that one particular one that you are looking for, or that test case does not exist? You want to make sure that at least that one is there.
It exists. It exists in the find API, right? Most times, what you do is, sorry, good news, your hand is up. Let me finish with this question and I'll get to you, okay? So the thing is, if you have multiple widgets, you want to find exactly one, right? What you will do is, you remember widgets, they take an optional key parameter. So what you do is you give that widget a key. Okay. You give that widget a key and you use the find by key instead. So okay, so you can see here it says finds widget by searching for one with the given key. Okay, because the key will uniquely identify that widget. But now the idea is we cannot have access to this key created inside here. Okay, because if you create the key inside this widget, for instance, this kind of key, we need to be able to access it and pass it. So the idea is this key now might now be a global variable, or maybe something injected through getX, something that will be available in your test case. Because as it is now, it is not available in your test case. Okay, I will get to this example when the time comes. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think I understand. I think I understand it. Thank you.
Okay, beautiful. Beautiful. All right, good news, your question. You guys should take it easy with the questions because we have to finish up before 6:10.
Okay,
Okay, so good news, go ahead.
my question is, this one we're finding by type, and you're saying it checks in the widget tree. Does it mean that irrespective of where it is in the widget tree, whether above it or like no matter how scattered it is, this one we're dealing with something in a column, all the texts are in one column. What if they were like somewhere else in the widget tree? Would that also pass the test?
Exactly. If you like, you can nest them however you want. Let's nest this one now. Let's wrap this one inside the size box and wrap the size box. Wrap the size box inside a container and wrap the container inside the column. So you can see this one is nested now, right? But we want to make sure that it finds exactly 3 because we know that all things being equal, there should be 3 text widgets inside our whole widget 3. Finds exactly. Now, if we run this test, Okay. Okay, so if you run this test now, right? All things being equal, this test should pass. Okay, so beautiful. So that means our logic is sound. And most time when I run this test, I hold my hold my hand in my chest. Okay, so that means our logic is sound. Even though this widget is nested inside a lot of parents, it still finds it. So does that answer your question? So you can move ahead.
Yes, it does. So does it mean this test will be using it while we are coding, or when are we using it?
You use it, you write test when you want to test the functionality in your program. Okay. When you want to test something, you want to make sure that it's occurred. I explained usage of tests previously. We were discussing unit tests, right? So when you want to make sure that something works as it should, you write test cases against it. And when it doesn't work, your test cases fail, which alerts you on time so you can go and fix the bug. So that's for test usage. So let's move ahead, right? So these are very, very simple. This is a very simple example. With this example now, we've seen sorry guys, having a slight challenge. Okay, so okay, beautiful. Let me just quickly share my screen again. Okay, so my screen should be up now, right? Okay, so this is a very, very, very simple example. Very simple example for testing. And with this example, we demonstrated how to find widgets in your widget tree. Okay. Now let's take it a notch further, actually. Let's take it up a notch. That's the correct expression, I think. Let's take it up a notch, right? Let's test interactions, button clicks. Okay. So you might have a button. Let me remove this for a minute. You might have a button. We have a button. I want to test the interaction. Maybe this button does something, right? Let's just make this a stateless widget just to, okay. Um, so what this button is basically going to do is it's going to increment our count and refresh the UI. Okay. So we've seen how to find widgets, right? So how do we now test this button interaction? Let's say you want to be displaying the count. Want to display the count on text widgets, right? So our test case now would be, we want to check that when this button is actually pressed. This is an example of application logic now. Want to check when this button is actually pressed that the count is incremented and the UI is refreshed to display the incremented count. So how do we write this test case? First of all, you start where by finding your widgets. So first of all, we find the text widgets. Okay, we find the test widget, and we have it here. First of all, let's inline this. We don't need it to be separate. Okay. Now this test case is incorrect. We have to change this to 1 because you know that we have just one text widget. Okay. Okay, beautiful. Now you want to actually find that a widget egg. Remember, we set this count to 0, right? That means the string here, the string displayed here initially will be 0, right? So we want to find that a widget with a string of 0 actually exists. Okay, so keep on writing the expect. Remember I said to find the text inside the widget tree, use the find.text method, right? So finds one, beautiful. Okay. So because you know that there will be a widget inside here that will have the 0 string, we do this, right? This test, right? Now, how do we now press this button to increment the count? How do we do that? This is where this tester comes in again. Very, very important guy. Okay, so we use something called tester dot tap. Tester.tap. Okay, now look at this tester.tap. Now, first of all, it is an asynchronous method, right? Now look at its parameter. The most important, which is the one we'll be looking at, is the finder. You can see it takes in a finder. So the idea is that it takes in a finder, basically the result of the finder, which is a widget. Okay, so we have to do. Sorry, give me a thumbs up if you can hear me, please. My network is okay. Give me a thumbs up real quick.
We can hear you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so we have to do a find.text. No, we're not find.text now. That's wrong. Because we want to find the button and interact with it, we do a find dot by type. Okay, our button type is a field button. Okay, so now just to make sure that our button is being pressed, let's just do a log here. Just to make sure that button is being pressed, right? So now after tapping this button, the idea is that this count is going to change to 1 because incrementing the first time from 0 is 1, right? So we now want to, after tapping the button, we now want to expect that find.text, where there is 1, finds at least 1 widget. Beautiful. I'll remove this test case so we don't notice. So now, if we run this test case looks grammatically correct, right? The first time you pump your widget, you find the text, it exits, find the one that has 0, it is there already. You tap it, it's increased to 1. Find the one that has 1 because you've tapped it and it has been increased to 1. This looks programmatically correct, right? But if you run this test, it should fail, and I'll explain why it fails. Oh, okay. Oh, like I said, wow. So it failed, right? Okay, so let's look at why it failed in a minute. We say the following test will occur, blah, blah, blah. Actual found 2 widgets with type text. Okay, okay, okay. Okay, okay. Well, this is not even the reason why it's failing. Okay. We are saying you should find 1, but we actually have 2 widgets here that is of type text. So this is not correct. So this should be instead find exactly 2. But this is not why I said this test would fail. So let's look at that in a minute. Okay, it failed again. So now let's look at why it failed. So it said exactly one, the following test figure was true running text, expected exactly one matching candidate, but the actual was 0. It didn't find any widget that had a text of 1, but it should have found the widget because the first time it found the one that has 0, right? So it should have found a widget that has 1 because when we press the button, this count is increased to 1. So why did it fail? That is because when your widget is rebuilt during a testing, okay, when your widget is rebuilt during a testing, to reflect that rebuild, you have to explicitly call tester dot home. Okay, that's explicitly called tester dot home. Now let's look at the documentation of this thing. Now you can say it triggers a frame after blah blah blah. Basically, what it's trying to tell you that it causes your widget tree to be rebuilt. Okay, kind of refreshes the UI. Let me say it that way. Okay, so that's the idea. So when you're expecting that your UI would have changed, okay, you have to do a tester.pom to kind of refresh it. So now we have this in place, okay. The test should pass right about now. Okay? So fingers crossed. Let's hope it passes. Let's hope it passes. Okay, so beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. So you can see now the test passes, right? And just to make sure that our pressed was called, just to make sure that this actually taps the button. So we have this button pressed, and you see they can see that it is logged in the terminal. So this is how you can interact with a button and test application logic. Okay, so this is for a simple stateful widget, right? Okay. So let's take it up a notch. Let's take it up a notch. At this point, does anyone have any question? You can ask me now before we. Okay, the answers on any question. Now let's look at in your application, you'll be having things like controllers. If you're using get, you're having things like controllers that control the state of the UI. So you want to be able to test those controllers, how they affect the state of the UI, right? So you need to be able to see the interactions in place. So here we just saw a simple state widget, and now let's see an example using the getX controller. Okay, so hypothetically this does, let's say, sign in. Just quickly set this up. So what this does is let's just simple implementation would be just kind of set state is the password. Okay. So now we have this controller, okay, and we have a boolean x. And we set it to false. So set it to true. Okay, this is a very mock implementation example, but just showcases what you can do, right? So how do we integrate this controller in your widgets and test the interactions? Let's say in this widget, you're using this controller like this. So I can do a get define. It give us the port controller. Now we want to display whether the user is signed in is because that we have to do it value here. Okay. So now our UI will be reacting to the state change of our controller, and we want to test the integration. Of course, they have to wrap this with an OBX so that it will be refreshed when state changes. EX, yeah. Okay, good. So we have that set up, right? So in this button, rather than increment this, we don't need this guy anymore. So I'm just gonna increment him.
Is there a way that you can just comment it out instead of removing them in case you want to look at it again?
Okay, that's a very good suggestion. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's comment this out. We don't need this guy anymore. So now, perhaps what we want to test now is that what we call controller.signed in, that our UI reflects that the user is signed in. Now, this is a very, very basic example, but it just demonstrates how you can use it in your own testing. So what do we do here? We do a controller.sign in, of course. We give it my email. It's synchronous, so we don't have to await it. Okay, beautiful. So how do we test this now? Always remember, your tests can have bugs too. So the idea of testing is for it to test your program. If your test is having bugs, I mean that defeats the whole purpose of testing. So you first of all have to understand what you are testing. So let's look at this example now. You want to test that when you actually call this button, and change this to when it says that when we actually call this button, we are actually signed in, and the UI is updated to show that the user is signed in. So first of all, what do we do? Mind you, don't have to always do find exactly before you start. You can just go straight to your test case, what you want to test, right? So just to make life easier, we're going to make these global variables. Let's see, can we do that? Yes. Text, not signing text. So we just make this global variable so we can access it inside our test case function. So now inside our test case, right? Because initially we know that if you're not signed in, you're going to test that we have a widget that shows this not signed in text. Okay, so how do we do that? Use the find.text finder. Okay. Okay, so this is the first thing we do, right? Good. And now we tap the button. Now I want to make sure that after tapping the button, the UI changes. Why does the UI change? Because remember that this OBX value is updated. So, and we wrapped this text with an OBX to reflect change, to rebuild when the OBX changes. Okay. Now we have that out of the way. So we want to test after tapping and pumping. that we can find the widget with sign in text. So now this is our test case. So if we run it, it should fail. And I'm going to explain why it's there to fail in a minute, right? Okay. Okay, like we said, it fails. So let's look at the fail logs. This is something you should get used to if you're writing tests, because you should be able to know why and debug why your test is failing. Okay, if it's too complicated for you, you can always copy this and paste it here and tell it to do this. And then see get the lazy put, right? Okay, good idea. So the thing is, we have a controller here and we are finding it, but we've not put it previously. Okay, when I taught state management, I explained that you have to put before you can find, right? Basically, you are finding something that is non-existent, and because of that, you get screams at us, tells us, no, we can't do this. So we have to put it. So how do we do that? Basically, you will do it in a setup function, but for this example, let's just do it inside this space. So we do a get the lazy put alt controller. Okay, get the lazy put. So if we run this test, everything being equal, you should pass now. Oh, okay, beautiful, beautiful. So you can see the test passes now. So this just gives you the idea of how you can test your widgets with your controllers and the rest of your application. So if you have your widgets want test that uses a controller, you have to inject the controller first, pump up that widget, and start writing your test
Hello, sir.
cases. So for instance, if there's a yeah,
I noticed in the debug logs, it gave suggestion on how to fix that. Do we always expect to get suggestions from our test on how to fix certain bugs? Or is that
yeah,
unusual?
yeah, the thing is, good question. The thing is, right, if the error you are facing is like a program error, things like you forgot to put something where you're supposed to put, you forgot to initialize something, like you saw you forgot to do a get the lazy put and get detects it. If it's like that, it can provide you suggestions, right? It's kind of subjective. It is get that gave us that subjection. Get gave us that suggestion through an error that you threw up the stack, right? But if it's a bug in your program, let's say there's something wrong with your actual code, of course you're not going to get suggestion. You're just going to get that the test fails. So it's now your work to go inside your code and find out where the bug is coming from. Okay, does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thanks.
Okay, beautiful. So, can you get your hands up?
Yes, like I have up to like 3 questions. First of all, this field button, I noticed that you've not changed it. Can it be any button, material button, elevated button, any type of button we are using in our application? Can it be?
Yeah, it can be any button. It can be any button you want. You maybe even a custom button you created. Okay, it can be any
Okay.
button you want, even a custom button you created. So the idea is that you have to actually find what you are looking for to interact with it. If you're using an elevated button, it doesn't make sense to come and try to find field button here when you're using an elevated button. Okay, but I think field button, elevated button, all those material buttons, they have a common ancestor. So if I open this up in a bit, okay, beautiful. Okay, beautiful. Okay, you can see that it has an ancestor, button style button. Uh, go to implementations. This takes a while. So the idea is if you don't really care about the type of button, you don't really care whether it's an elevated button or any type of button. You can just find the common ancestor that those buttons share. I don't know if that does that make sense. Do you understand?
Yes, yes. That's no matter the button, anyone we put will work as long as
Yeah,
it's a
that's if you
button.
don't. Yes, if you don't care about the exact type of button, if you don't care whether it's a field, elevated, outlined, because all of them, I think all of them share. Just to be sure, uh, all of them will share a common ancestor. So this is an elevated button. Okay, good. You can see now, an elevated button extends this button style button. So if I try to use button style button now, it should work, right? So that's the idea. Just basic,
All right.
basic OOP.
Okay. The second one is are we
Mhm.
know is does group by, like we did in the unit testing, group by setup, when you initialize even the I've forgotten what you initialize, the widgets inside the setup. Do we also do it here? The group
Yes, of
by and
course. Of course.
setup.
The concept of testing is different, right? The concept of testing is different. Sorry, the concept of testing is the same. Remember, I told you that this Flutter test depends on the test package, right? That means most of the things you have, you can do with the test package, you can do it with inside Flutter test. So we can decide to put this inside a group and name this group test port controller interaction with UI. Okay, so I will now put this test case. We put this test case inside a group. Just like the unit testing example, this one should work. Put the syntax all wrong. Okay, yeah, that's
Like,
correct
can you do
syntax.
Control Z? I think one column. Okay, yeah, okay.
Okay, so yeah, so this is the syntax. So programmatically, you can see it's correct. Syntactically, you can see it's correct. So running this test should do the same thing. So you can use group by, you can even use the setup tear down functions I told you, right? I taught you setup, inside the setup, you can do your now we need to debug why this test is failing. Inside this test setup, you can actually do your get.lazy put. Remember when I said setup is run before your tests start running? Let's say you want to dispose of some system resources that your test is using and also add tear down here. So let's see why our test is failing. Okay, oh, because we changed something, that's why the test is failing now. You say found zero widgets with type elevated button used in core. Yeah, because you're not using an elevated button, you see. We are using a field button and we're trying to find the elevated button instead. So that means there's a bug in our program. And in this case, this is where you go inside your program
Why don't we try
and
using that button styles button?
okay, yeah, beautiful. Let's
Common
let's let's try let's try that. Let's try that. Uh, okay. All things being equal, should work. Test fails again. Okay, found zero widgets with type. Button style button use make okay. I see what's going on here. Okay, beautiful. I forgot to note this. This button style button is an abstract class. It's an abstract class, right? So because it's an abstract class, you really can't find instances of it using the system. The testing system uses exact type matching. So because button style button is an abstract class, so it doesn't really see it as something that has an instance inside your widget tree. So that's what's going on here. That's what's going on here, right? Okay, yeah. So thank you for that. Thank you for making us try that. So, Inika, do you have any other question? You said you had how many questions again?
Yeah, I've asked all of them, but just one that is not really part of the entire class. I was just wondering about it anyway.
Yeah.
Can I go ahead?
It's almost
All right.
6:10, so we need to be quick.
Okay, sorry. During our project, are we going to work as a team, like the designers, the back end, or it's just us personally and our Firebase, like a personal project? And are we working as a team or is independently?
Well, of course, you work with a team. You're not a designer. You're going to build a full-fledged project. So you have a designer on your team, you have a backend developer on your team, potentially have DevOps, basically all the tracks that are in KodeCamp.
Hello,
You'll be grouped together
Wow.
with them.
So
hello,
we'll be grouped.
Yes,
hello,
you'll be
sir.
grouped.
Is
Yeah,
there
All
go ahead.
right.
a project coming up?
Yeah, couple projects coming up. First of all, you guys will work on a personal one first, then your
When is it?
capstone would be a grouped one.
When
Okay?
is it coming up?
You,
I'm just hearing about this.
ah, my young man, you're in a boot camp. Of course, I'm going to have projects. You need to attend the onboarding.
I didn't
He
attend
joined
that video.
late.
Late.
Okay, you joined late. Good news. You're the one that joined late.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, yes, you'll be working on projects, and the first one will be coming up August, first week of August. Then the second one, which will be the capstone one, which will be the one that will determine if you'll be certified, and the one you'll be grouped together for will
Is it
be
for 3 months? The one that is for 3 months.
1 month. 1 month. The capstone is 1 month. 1 month to build the product. So you
Wow.
guys will be grouped for that one, right?
I thought they
So
say we are
yeah.
doing 3 months internship. I thought that was it.